Oh yeah, Castlevania Rondo of Blood. Easily one of the greatest titles in the entire series. I already went over why that is in an earlier video, but long story short, that game is freaking amazing. However, its existence did present a bit of an issue. For the next big mainline Castlevania game, the PC engine was a bit of an odd choice. And combined with the game initially only releasing in Japan, not a lot of people got to play Rondo of Blood in the 90s, which is a shame, not only because of how good the game is, but also because Western Castlevania fans were missing a pretty major part of the series. And that brings us to today's topic, Castlevania Dracula X. Released for the SNES back in 1995, Dracula X is a bit of a weird one to talk about. From the outset, it's a downgraded SNES port of Rondo of Blood, meant to bring the story of Richter Belmont to a wider market. However, calling Dracula X a simple port of Rondo of Blood would do it a major disservice, as it does more than enough to be considered its own separate game. It's kinda like how Vampire Killer was a reimagining of the original Castlevania, throwing its own stupid ideas in there to spice it up. And this leads me into an interesting talking point regarding Dracula X. And that is that unlike Rondo of Blood, this is one of the least liked classic Castlevania games of all time. Most consider Dracula X to be a cheap, poorly thrown together imitation of Rondo of Blood, supporting some of the worst, most overly punishing level design in the entire series. Now that might be a bit of an exaggeration, but I feel that most Castlevania fans just want nothing to do with Dracula X. So now it's time to see where I stand on this debate. I first played Dracula X around summer of 2019 on the new 3DS of all places, and while I don't remember my exact opinion on it, I do distinctly recall thinking it's not as bad as everyone said it was. But now it's time to finally lock in my opinion on this installment. Keep in mind that as this game is built off of Rondo of Blood, this video will also be built off of that one, and as such, I'll be going into it with the pretense that you've already seen it or have played Rondo of Blood for yourselves. Of course, I do that with all of my Castlevania videos. However, I think that it's especially important for this one. Just like how it's important for you to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it. It helps a lot and I'll be very grateful. But without further ado, let's do this. Castlevania Dracula X. The name Dracula X is kinda stupid. It makes it so that when you Google it, you just get a bunch of ships. But whatever. Dracula X Shaft is the OTP, don't at me. As a reimagining, the story of Dracula X is near identical to the one from Rondo of Blood. It does make a few alterations, such as having Maria and the Netby sisters, as well as Dracula only kidnapping them, no Terra or Iris in sight. But for the most part, this is the same story. As you would probably expect, Dracula X lacks any of the cutscenes found in the PC Engine game. Those would definitely be a bit much for the SNES. However, I do think the game maybe could have thrown in a few more of its own cinematic scenes there to spice the story up. As it is, we only get a wall of text in the beginning. And this reminds me, one thing I do prefer about Dracula X when compared to Rondo would have to be the art design. Rondo of Blood went for a more traditional anime aesthetic, which I wasn't really a fan of. However, Dracula X decided to do its own thing with the artwork, and in my opinion, it is a lot more striking. I know jack shit about art, so I don't really know how to classify this style. It kinda reminds me of superhero comic covers, and despite not being how I would personally picture Castlevania, supporting some slightly awkward character redesigns. Maria, what the hell are you staring at? I do think these illustrations are superior to what we got in Rondo. It's great that Dracula looks awesome here again, as opposed to whatever the hell was going on with him last time. However, these official illustrations don't really affect the game itself or how it looks. Most of the sprites in Dracula X are recycled from Rondo of Blood. There are a few new enemies here and there, often supporting these weird heavy outlines, but otherwise this is mostly familiar territory. And as the sprites in Rondo are all excellent, I don't find them being reused to be much of an issue. The environment on the other hand is all mostly completely new. And honestly, I'm a bit mixed on how the areas in this game look. Stuff like the fire from the first level uses mode 7 techniques to display a pretty neat effect. but other than that, heavy tech utilization is pretty minimal here. In truth, most of the areas in Dracula X are kind of generic and flat. I can't really recall much in the way of landmarks, and I think that the colors here are just a bit off. I don't know, maybe it's the saturation, but I feel like the brightness of a lot of these locations is a bit weird. Most of the areas are, again, from Rondo of Blood, but Dracula X does also have some new areas, like this neat crystal cavern, and this far less neat regular cavern. The UI as well goes for a very different style, and while I do prefer Rondo's more solid menus, the ones here do look neat as well. This is definitely a good looking SNES game. I'd say it's far more pleasing than Castlevania 4, and for taking a lot of assets from a game on far stronger hardware, I think that this is definitely a job well done, and I could say a similar thing about the music. Almost all of it is from Rondo, with a few decent new cutscene tracks thrown in there as well. Of course, Rondo of Blood had CD quality audio. We can't really expect the SNES to perfectly replicate them, so what we get instead are SNES-styled renditions of said original tracks, and for the most part, they are all very well crafted. The PC Engine renditions of them are all definitely superior, but what we do get here is far from bad. Of course, Rondo of Blood soundtrack is absolutely incredible, so messing it up would take quite a bit of effort, but regardless, I think the job here is very much commendable. Sadly, not all of the original tracks are here. Cross a Fear, one of my personal favorites, is sadly missing, but thank God we once again have Vampire Killer Bloody Tears and Beginnings. Now those are the tracks that really deserved more love. So in terms of presentation, I think the jump from the PC Engine to the SNES was handled well. However, and this point is going to be a bit tough to explain, but Dracula X doesn't really play that well. I think this mostly has to do with the frame rate. It feels like you're playing Rondo of Blood at like half the FPS. The controls and animations here all feel pretty laggy. The jumping, whipping, backflipping, everything here just feels kinda off. The regular movement had it the worst though. Richter is so slow on the ground, and the annoying thing is that he actually picks up acceleration when he jumps, meaning that the fastest way to move is just to hop around everywhere, which is not the most elegant of solutions. And then there's also small stuff, like how when picking up an orb after beating a boss, you will immediately be sent to the results screen, which means you don't get to strike a cool pose, what the heck? These issues will probably mainly affect people who have already played Rondo of Blood, and even then I did begrudgingly get used to the choppier movement around an hour or so in, but still I feel that the programming here could have been sharper. Mechanically, Richter is near identical to how he was in Rondo, so while not feeling as smooth, he still more than gets the job done. Other than the Bible, all of Rondo's sub-weapons are also back, though these have received some minor alterations. For example, the holy water now consumes 3 hearts instead of 1, and while its, along with the dagger and axe's item crashes are still the same, the other 2 weapons did receive brand new ones. The cross is once again a screen hook, only this time throwing a bunch of small projectiles on the screen instead of a few big ones, and the stopwatch now gives you this shield for 15 hearts, which is seriously awesome. It might honestly be my favorite item crash in the game if I'm being honest. Like, the stopwatch's original item crash was cool, but this is way more practical and can seriously decimate bosses if used correctly. But, yeah, with all of that out of the way, I guess it's time to talk about the structure and level design. Woohoo. Rondo of Blood went for a slightly different, more open-ended approach with its levels. However, Dracula X dials it back down, supporting far more traditional stage structure. With only a few exceptions, there are no alternate exits here. The game also lacks a save feature, instead relying on passwords like Castlevania 4 and Bloodlines. It is a bit of a shame that we don't have Rondo's convenient level select screen, but seeing as all of the passwords are readily available online, this is a sacrifice I can take. But oh boy, these levels, I'm gonna be real with ya chief, these aren't all that well designed. There are bottomless pits everywhere in Dracula X, which is funny considering that Rondo of Blood basically had none of them, and a lot of the jumps here require you to get way too close to the edge. Remember that one annoying jump jump from the final level of Chronicles? Well, yeah, it gets pretty close to that. A lot of the times, failing to make these leaps won't even kill you. You'll just have to make the long, tedious way back with the game's slowest walking speed. There are numerous areas where I can point that sort of design out, but my favorite would have to be the one from stage 5, as there is literally an infinitely spawning pot roast in the previous room, meaning that until you can make this jump, you will be stuck going in this circle for all eternity. Actually, this room also highlights a lot of the other issues I have with Dracula X. First of all, the enemy spam is at an all-time high here. Whoever made these levels must have had a fucking hard-on for these purple armor knights. They are everywhere in this game, it's almost comical. I do think they make for fun battles, especially with Richter's superior combat capabilities, but my god, do they just get irritating by the end. And other than the sheer amount of enemies, good lord, the enemy placement. Dracula X really likes to put beefy enemies at the tips of platforms you're trying to jump to, so you're either going to jump at them and confront them, which let me remind you is not a good idea, as due to the knockback, a single hit will all but guarantee your doom. So alternatively, you can try to carefully chip away at them from a safe distance. And of course, any logical person who isn't a speedrunner would go with the latter approach. And let me tell ya, these sure make for some boring ass fights. Honestly, I don't even think the level layouts themselves are all that bad. Sure, it's some of the most forgettable stuff the series has seen yet, but you know, it isn't terrible per se. However, the enemy placements and the sheer amount of them is what I feel ruins these stages. And then there's the process of rescuing Maria and Annette. Bear with me here. Okay, so in level 3, you have to get through this room teeming with bottomless pits and Medusa heads. If you fall down these pits, however, instead of dying, you will be immediately sent to alternate stage 4, and if that happens, then you lose your shot at rescuing either of the hostages. But okay, you made it through. Now before the boss battle, you want to pick up this key and proceed to defeat the level's boss while holding on to it. Still with me? Good. So now that you're done with that, you'll instead be sent to the regular stage 4, where you have to hold on to this key for basically the entire level. So if you die here, tough shit. There ain't no other key. The hostages are doomed forever. Reset the game, insert this password and try again. The best tip I can give you is to use the key's item crash. It literally does nothing, but it gives you some invincibility frame, so might as well abuse it. After you get to this area, use the key to open this door, and congratulations fucker, Maria has been released. And before you ask, no, you cannot play as her here, because the PC engine does what Nintendo don't or something like that. However, we're still not out of the woodwork yet. We still need to save Annette, so keep holding on to that key like your life freaking depends on it. When you get to this room, don't go left. That will lock you out of saving Annette. Instead, use your key to open the door on the right. This will send you to alternate stage 5, where you can destroy this water patch over here, and finally rescue Annette down below. Jesus Christ. I have no idea why this process had to be as overly convoluted as it is. Doing this side quest is barely even worthwhile. All it changes is that you battle death instead of Carmilla in level 6, and you get a different ending picture. I mean, rescuing the hostages in Rondo was also pretty pointless, but at least there the process was simple and straight to the point. Bleh. Okay, so it seems I happened to go on a bit of a rant over these last few paragraphs. Well, I would like to maybe get a bit more positive towards Dracula X. So now, let's talk about what I think is one of its highlights. Much like Rondo of Blood, most of the bosses here are once again some of the best in the series. A large majority of them are just recycled from the PC Engine game, and while a bit clunkier, these fights are still highly engaging. However, shockingly enough, the real standouts here are the brand new bosses, as I think that many of them stand toe to toe with some of Rondo's absolute best. Instead of the Wyvern, the first stage throws out this freaking Cerberus at you, already setting in that this is going to be a far more challenging journey. This guy is definitely a bit on the hard side where first bosses are concerned, but still, this is a great battle. Carmilla is back and has received a complete overhaul. I think the reason for that is because the Rondo design was a bit risque, which at the time Nintendo probably wanted nothing to do with. Heck, in the Western release, they even censored out the blood and replaced it with ice? Well anyways, the new skeleton looks a bit goofy, but mechanically the battle itself is just as good as the original. My favorite new boss would easily have to be Shaft's ghost. This battle wipes the floor with the one from Rondo. Shaft has 2 phases and a bunch of attacks to throw at you. One of the best bosses the series has seen yet. However, when talking about the bosses from Dracula X, there is one elephant we have to talk about before finishing this off for good. The most infamous part of the entire game, and yeah, I would have to agree with the common consensus here. The final battle against Dracula is absolutely terrible. Dracula himself acts exactly how he did in Rondo, but I mean, just look at this battle arena. This looks straight out of some sadistic Kaizo ROM hack. I know I already said that with Castlevania The Adventure, but damn it, this one is even worse. There is a candle here with some meat to help keep you going, but while the jester is nice, in the long run, this doesn't mean shit, as the reason you die here will more than likely be due to the freaking knockback. And even setting that aside, this battle is just an absolute chore. The arena is way too large, and due to how dangerous it is to move, you're likely going to just want to wait for Dracula to come to you from a safe distance, getting as many chip shots with the axe as you can. And let me tell ya, you do not want to die here, because if you get a game over, you have to go through stage 7 all over again. The level itself is thankfully pretty short, but still, why? And once you do beat him, that's not even the end of it. He has a completely new second phase, where he turns into this swole as fuck demon. For this phase, you basically want to get into this corner over here and keep on attacking, praying to Christ that Dracula will fall down before you do. And yeah, this is kinda just more BS. This final battle is actually so infamous that someone who goes by Dark Samus 993 made a ROM hack of Dracula X that literally just removes the pits from Dracula's room. The battle itself is still boring and it is a bit on the too easy side with this hack, but man, I will take this over the regular fight any day of the freaking week. And so, Richter gives Dracula the L, and the game is completed. You get one of 3 different ending images depending on how many hostages you rescued. These are neat, but definitely not worth going through all of the trouble for. And yeah, that sure was Dracula X, alright? So, is Castlevania Dracula X a good game? No. Do I like Dracula X? No. So then, do I dislike Dracula X? Well, to be honest, my answer here would still have to be the same no. Much like Simon's quest before it, I came into Dracula X partially wanting to defend it, as again, I do remember thinking it was better than most gave it credit for, but in the long run, writing this script just made me realize that I do in fact agree with what most people say about this game. However, I do still think it deserves more credit than it gets. As a conversion of Rondo of Blood, it does way more than it needed to. We could have just gotten a watered down port of Rondo of Blood with recycled levels and worse visuals, but instead what we got is a pretty faithful visual conversion, supporting some killer bosses and art design. This game is still built on Rondo of Blood, and so many of that game's strengths do indeed carry over to Dracula X. Despite all of my issues with the game, I did still end up having a good time playing through it. This is something I can definitely only recommend to Castlevania fans. By any means necessary, do not start the series here, but if you're already experienced with the classic Castlevania series and have not played Dracula X yet, then by all means I would recommend it. At the very least, I think you'll find it novel. I'd put Dracula X below Chronicles and above the Kid Dracula duology. But yeah, now that we're done with Dracula X, I guess it's finally time, huh? Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot believe I am actually saying this, but the next time we'll be looking at this series will be with Castlevania Symphony of the Night. This is gonna be a big one, but trust me, I'm gonna make it the absolute best I possibly could. So until then, without further ado, have a good one.